I stood in the empty gymnasium, holding my blue ribbon, and waited for them to walk through those doors. They never came. The ribbon felt heavier than it should have, the satin slipping between my fingers as I watched other families embrace their children, snap photographs, exclaim over poster boards and carefully constructed models. My project, a working model demonstrating water filtration through natural materials, sat on the table behind me, proud and alone. The judges had called it innovative. They'd said I had real potential. The woman with the clipboard had even mentioned scholarships. But the folding chairs in front of my display remained empty. I knew where they were. Of course I knew. Sophie's rehearsal dinner had been scheduled for weeks, circled in red on the kitchen calendar, while my science fair had been written in pencil, easily erased, easily forgotten. When I'd reminded them that morning, my mother had looked at me with that particular expression of mild distraction she reserved for my accomplishments. "Oh, Amelia, the dinner is tonight. We can't miss it. Sophie's been preparing for this role for months." My father hadn't even looked up from his newspaper. "You understand, don't you? Your sister's career is at a critical point." I'd understood. I'd always understood. Understanding was what I did best. The gymnasium began to empty. I dismantled my project carefully, packing each component with the precision I'd learnt from years of being careful, being quiet, being the daughter who didn't require attention. The drive home was silent, except for the sound of my materials shifting in the box beside me on the passenger seat. I'd taken the bus to school that morning, anticipating this moment, knowing I'd be returning alone. The house was still empty when I arrived. I carried my project upstairs, past Sophie's bedroom with its door decorated with theatre playbills and drama masks, past the living room wall covered with her performance photographs. My own room was at the end of the hall, smaller, quieter, decorated with nothing but a few science books and a poster of the periodic table I'd bought myself. I set the blue ribbon on my desk, positioning it carefully so it wouldn't fall. Then I sat on my bed and looked at it. The silence around me felt complete. I didn't cry. Crying required energy I'd stopped wasting years ago. Instead, I felt that familiar numbness settling over me like a second skin, the protective barrier that had kept me functioning through Sophie's middle school graduation when they'd forgotten mine was the same week, through her acceptance to Performing Arts Academy, when my acceptance to the Science Magnet programme had gone unmentioned, through every forgotten birthday dinner and missed parent-teacher conference. I'd learned to exist in the spaces between their attention, in the quiet moments when Sophie wasn't performing or practicing or demanding their focus. I'd learned to make myself small. The front door opened around midnight. I heard their voices, bright and animated, discussing Sophie's performance, her interpretation of the character, the director's praise. My mother's laugh carried up the stairs. The sound of genuine delight I heard so rarely directed at anything involving me. I waited for someone to remember, to knock on my door, to ask how the science fair had gone. No one came. I turned off my light and lay in the darkness, the blue ribbon visible in the moonlight streaming through my window. My last thought before sleep claimed me was simple and clear. This is what I'm worth to them. Nothing. The room was too bright when I opened my eyes. For a moment, I couldn't place what felt wrong. The angle of the sunlight was different, the weight of the blankets unfamiliar. I sat up slowly, confusion clouding my thoughts, and then I saw the calendar on my wall. It was dated 3 years earlier. My hands moved to my face, feeling the contours, and I stumbled to the mirror. The reflection showed me at 14, my features younger, softer, unmarked by the careful blankness I'd learned to wear. I touched the glass, watching the younger version of myself mirror the movement, and understanding crashed over me like cold water. I'd died. I must have died. The details were hazy, impressionistic. A car, headlights, the sound of impact. I'd been walking home from somewhere alone as always, and then nothing. And now I was here, 3 years in the past, given something I'd never dared to hope for. A second chance. The thought had arrived with crystalline clarity. I wasn't 14 anymore, not really. I carried 17 years of memories, 17 years of lessons learned through careful observation and quiet pain. I knew exactly how the next 3 years would unfold if I let them. Every forgotten event, every dismissal, every moment of being invisible while Sophie shone. I knew, and I could choose differently. The decision settled into me with surprising ease. I wouldn't beg for their attention anymore. I wouldn't perform the role of the understanding daughter, the one who could always be counted on to step aside. I would focus on myself, on my own future, and let them realise too late what they had overlooked. I would become everything I was capable of being, and they would never see it coming. That morning at breakfast, I observed them with new eyes. My mother moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, preparing Sophie's favourite breakfast. Sophie herself sat at the table, running lines from her latest audition, her voice filling the space with dramatic emphasis. My father read the news on his tablet, occasionally nodding at something Sophie said. I ate my cereal in silence, but now the silence was chosen, intentional. When my mother asked if I'd finished my homework, I simply nodded. When Sophie complained about a classmate getting a role she wanted, I didn't offer the sympathy I once would have. I simply listened, offering nothing of myself. The difference was subtle, but I felt it like a tectonic shift beneath my skin. At school, I sought out my science teacher, Dr. Williams. In my first life, I'd been too shy to ask for the opportunities I desperately wanted. Now, I walked into her classroom after the final bell with my shoulders straight. I want to do independent research, I said. I want to enter every science competition available. I want to push myself as far as I can go. Dr. Williams studied me with sharp intelligence. That's ambitious, Amelia. What changed? I stopped waiting for permission, I said simply. She smiled, and something in her expression told me she understood more than I'd said. Then, let's get started. Over the following weeks, I immersed myself in work. I stayed late at the school lab, volunteered for every extra credit opportunity, reached out to programs I'd only dreamed of before. My grades, already good, became exceptional. But more than that, I found something I'd lost in my first life. Joy in the work itself, untainted by the need for validation I'd never receive. At home, I became a ghost by choice. I spent minimal time in common spaces, ate quickly and retreated to my room, responded to questions with brevity that required no follow-up. My parents seemed almost relieved. Without my quiet presence, they could focus entirely on Sophie, without the mild guilt my existence occasionally triggered. It was exactly what I wanted. The first major science competition came 4 months into my rebirth, a regional event that would lead to state and potentially national levels. I prepared with methodical intensity, refining my project on alternative energy storage until it sang with precision. Dr. Williams helped me practice my presentation until my delivery was flawless. I didn't mention it at home. When my mother asked vaguely about school, I said it was fine. When my father inquired about my grades, I told him they were good. The competition fell on the same weekend as Sophie's showcase performance, and I simply told them I had plans with a friend. They didn't ask for details. I took the bus to the competition venue, carrying my materials in the same careful way I had in my first life. But this time, there was no expectation, no hope that they might surprise me. There was only focus and the calm certainty of my own capability. I won first place. The judge shook my hand and told me my work showed exceptional promise. Dr. Williams beamed with pride. The scholarship offer came a week later, a full ride to a summer program at a prestigious university, usually reserved for juniors and seniors. They were making an exception for me. At dinner that night, Sophie talked about her performance. She'd received standing ovations, apparently. The director had mentioned her name to a talent scout. My mother's eyes shone with tears of pride. "How was your weekend, Amelia?" my father asked absently, reaching for more potatoes. "Fine," I said. "I won a science competition. They're sending me to a university program this summer." The words dropped into the conversation like stones into still water. My mother looked up, fork pausing halfway to her mouth. Sophie stopped mid-sentence. My father blinked. "You what?" my mother said. "I won a regional science competition," I repeated calmly. "I'll be attending a summer program at Whitmore University. They're offering a scholarship." "You didn't tell us you were competing," my father said, and I heard the faint accusation in his tone, as if my failure to inform them was the issue rather than their failure to notice. "I mentioned it," I said, which was technically true. I'd mentioned it once, in passing, 3 months ago. They hadn't heard me. They never did. "It's all arranged. Dr. Williams helped me with the paperwork." Sophie recovered first, her performer's instincts kicking in. "That's great, Amelia!" Her enthusiasm sounded genuine enough that I almost believed it. Almost. My mother's expression cycled through confusion, guilt, and finally settled on something like concern. "Whitmore is 3 hours away. You'll be gone all summer?" "Yes," I said simply. "But Sophie's big audition is in July. We were going to make it a family trip." The old Amelia would have immediately offered to change her plans. The new Amelia met her mother's eye steadily. "I can't change the program dates. It's a significant opportunity." My father frowned. "You could have consulted us before committing." "You weren't available to consult," I said, my tone remaining even, factual. "And I'm capable of making decisions about my education." The silence that followed was uncomfortable in a way I found quietly satisfying. I'd never contradicted them before, never asserted my own needs over the family's unspoken hierarchy. The discomfort was theirs to sit with, not mine. Sophie filled the silence with more talk about her audition, and my parents eagerly returned their attention to safer ground. I finished my dinner and excused myself, feeling their bewilderment like a physical presence behind me. Let them wonder, let them start to notice what they'd been missing. The summer program was transformative. Surrounded by students who loved science as much as I did, mentored by professors who saw my potential, I bloomed in ways I'd never imagined possible. My project evolved into something publishable. My confidence grew not from external validation, but from genuine competence earned through focused effort. I returned home in August taller, somehow. Though I hadn't grown. The change was in how I carried myself, how I moved through space without apologising for taking up room. Sophie had gotten the role she'd auditioned for. The house buzzed with preparations for her performances. I listened to their excitement with detachment, neither resentful nor invested. Their joy didn't diminish me anymore, because I'd stopped measuring my worth by their attention. My junior year began with an acceleration of everything I'd built. More competitions, more recognition, more opportunities. My name appeared in the local paper after I won the state science fair. A journalist interviewed me for a feature on exceptional students. My inbox filled with emails from program directors and university recruiters. At home, my parents began to notice. Small things at first. My mother commenting on how often I stayed late at school. My father mentioning he'd heard my name from a colleague whose daughter competed against me. Sophie started asking questions about my work, her interest feeling more curious than competitive. But it was too late for their sudden attention to mean anything to me. I'd learnt to flourish without it. The invitations to showcase my work grew more prestigious, a symposium at the state capitol, a national competition in Denver, a spot in a documentary about young scientists. Each time I informed my parents with calm brevity, required their signatures on permission forms, and made my own arrangements for everything else. They began to look at me differently, as if seeing me clearly for the first time, and being startled by what they found. The science fair came around again in spring of my junior year, 3 years after that first ribbon they'd never seen. This time, I was competing at the national level, my project refined through multiple iterations and mentorships. The event was held in Washington, D.C., a week-long affair with workshops, presentations, and the final competition. Sophie had a performance the same weekend, a significant one, her largest role yet in a community theatre production that had garnered professional attention. At dinner, 2 weeks before both events, my mother brought it up. "Your father and I have been discussing travel arrangements," she said carefully. "Sophie's performance is the same weekend as your competition." I continued eating, waiting. "We were thinking," my father said, "that maybe we could split up. Your mother could go to Sophie's performance, and I could come to Washington with you." The offer hung in the air. In my first life, I would have been desperately grateful for even this divided attention. Now, I felt only a mild curiosity about their motivation. "That's not necessary," I said. "I'll be busy with the competition schedule. There's not much for parents to do." My mother's face fell slightly. "We'd like to support you, Amelia. We realise we haven't always been as present as we should have been." The admission came 3 years too late. I looked at her, this woman who'd raised me but never truly seen me, and felt nothing but distant compassion. "I appreciate that," I said, "but I've learnt to handle things on my own. You should both go to Sophie's performance. She'll want you there." "What about what you want?" my father asked. The question was so absurd I almost laughed. "What I want is to compete at the highest level I'm capable of," I said. "Whether you're there or not doesn't change that anymore." The words landed with visible impact. Sophie, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke. "I think you should go to her competition." We all turned to look at her. She was staring at her plate, her usual confidence subdued. "My performance will have other nights. This is nationals. Amelia should have someone there." "Sophie, this is your big break," my mother said. "And I'll have other big breaks," Sophie said. She looked up, meeting my eyes. "I've had you at every performance, every rehearsal, every audition. When was the last time either of you went to something for Amelia?" The silence was deafening. "It's fine," I said, meaning it. "I don't need anyone there." "That's the problem," Sophie said quietly. "You shouldn't have to need it. It should just be given." I studied my sister, seeing something in her expression I'd never noticed before. Guilt, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. In my first life, I'd been so consumed with my own invisibility that I'd never considered what Sophie might have seen or known. Perhaps she'd always been aware of the imbalance, but hadn't known how to address it without surrendering the attention she'd always received. "I'm going to Washington," my father said firmly. "Your mother can go to Sophie's performance. This discussion is over." My mother nodded, though she looked troubled. "I'll come to the next one," she said to me, "if there is a next one." "There will be," I said, stating simple, fact rather than boast. The competition in Washington was exactly as intense as I'd anticipated. 3 days of presentations, interviews with judges, and networking with other young scientists from across the country. My father arrived on the second day, navigating the convention centre with obvious bewilderment at the scale of the event. I found him staring at my project display, reading the technical description I'd written to accompany my prototype. When he noticed me approaching, something shifted in his expression. "I don't understand half of what this says," he admitted, "but I can tell it's impressive." "It is," I said, without false modesty. "I've been working on it for 2 years." 2 years, he repeated, and I heard him doing the math, realising how much had been happening beyond his awareness. "When did you become this person?" I've always been this person, I said. You just weren't looking. The words were neither cruel nor kind, simply true. He flinched anyway. The awards ceremony took place on the final evening in a hotel ballroom filled with students, parents, teachers, and judges. I sat with my fellow competitors, my father in the audience somewhere behind me. When they announced the third place winner, I felt calm. When they announced second place, my heart rate barely increased. First place in the Advanced Environmental Science category, the announcer said, and recipient of a full scholarship to the International Youth Science Summit in Geneva, Switzerland, Amelia Hartwell. The applause washed over me as I walked to the stage. The trophy was substantial, heavy, real. I shook hands with the judges, smiled for photographs, and returned to my seat with the same calm focus that had carried me here. It wasn't until later, after the ceremony ended and the crowd began to disperse, that my father found me. His eyes were red-rimmed, and when he spoke, his voice cracked. "I'm so proud of you," he said. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there to see you become this." I held the trophy between us like a shield. "I became this because you weren't there," I said. I learnt to do it for myself. The truth of it hit him visibly. "Amelia?" "It's okay," I said, and I meant it. I'd stopped needing his pride, his recognition, his attention. I'd found something more durable. Self-sufficiency built on genuine achievement. "I'm okay. I'm better than okay." "Can we fix this?" he asked. "Can we start over?" I considered the question seriously. In my first life, I died invisible and forgotten. In this one, I'd built something no one could ignore. But forgiveness wasn't about them anymore. It was about releasing the weight of old hurts that no longer served me. "We can start from here," I said finally. "But I won't go back to being invisible. I won't shrink myself to make room for someone else's shine." "I would never ask you to," he said. "You did," I corrected gently. "For years you did. You just didn't realize you were doing it." He had no answer for that. The return home should have felt triumphant, but instead it felt strangely anticlimactic. Sophie's performance had gone well, according to my mother's excited phone calls. She'd received excellent reviews. A talent agent had expressed interest. The usual trajectory of Sophie's rising star. But when I walked through the front door with my trophy and my father behind me, something was different. My mother stood in the entryway, and her eyes went immediately to the award in my hands. Sophie emerged from the kitchen, still in her rehearsal clothes, and stopped when she saw me. "You won," Sophie said. It wasn't a question. "I won," I confirmed. My mother approached slowly, as if I might startle and disappear. She reached out to touch the trophy, her fingers tracing the engraved letters of my name. "May I?" she asked. I handed it to her, watching as she read the inscription in full. When she looked up, tears streaked her face. "I missed it," she said. "I missed all of it." "Yes," I said simply. "How do I fix this?" she asked, echoing my father's earlier question. I thought about the blue ribbon from my first life, sitting on a desk in a timeline that no longer existed. I thought about standing alone in that gymnasium, waiting for people who never came. I thought about the girl I'd been, desperate for crumbs of attention, and the woman I'd become, nourished by her own determination. "You don't fix it," I said. "You can't, but you can be present going forward. You can see me now." Sophie stepped forward. "I see you," she said quietly. "I think I always did a little. I just didn't know how to share the spotlight." I looked at my sister, this person I'd resented in my first life, and saw her more clearly than I ever had before. She'd been trapped in her own way, conditioned into perform for love she'd thought was conditional on her achievements. We'd both been casualties of our parents' misplaced priorities, just in different ways. The spotlight's big enough for both of us, I said. We just have to decide we're not competing for the same light. Something shifted in the room then, a subtle realignment of long-held patterns. My mother set my trophy on the mantel, right in the centre where Sophie's awards usually lived. Sophie moved some of her plaques to make room, creating space deliberately. "Tell us about Geneva," my father said. "Tell us everything about your work." So, I did. I talked about my research, my goals, my plans for the future. They listened, really listened, in a way they never had before. Sophie asked questions that showed she was trying to understand. My mother took notes, as if afraid she might forget some crucial detail. It wasn't enough to erase the past. It couldn't give me back those years of invisibility. But it was a beginning, and for the first time since my rebirth, I felt something unexpected. Hope that my family might become something more than the source of my pain. The months following Nationals passed in a blur of preparation. The summit in Geneva promised to be the most significant scientific event I'd ever attended. I'd be presenting alongside students from 40 countries, working with leading researchers in environmental science, potentially positioning myself for undergraduate opportunities that most students could only dream of. My parents insisted on coming to Switzerland with me. We compromised. They would attend the opening and closing ceremonies, but leave me to focus on the work itself. It was more than I'd expected and less than they wanted to give, a balance that felt sustainable. Sophie auditioned for a prestigious performing arts academy in New York. When her acceptance letter arrived, we celebrated together, my parents equally present for both her triumph and the final preparations for my trip. The equity felt strange and new, but I was learning to accept it without the cynicism that had protected me for so long. The night before my flight to Geneva, I found Sophie in my room. She sat on my bed, holding the first place trophy from Nationals, studying it with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You know what's strange?" she said without preamble. "I always knew I was the favourite. I just never thought about what that meant for you." I leaned against my desk, considering my response. "You were a kid. We both were." "That's generous," she said. "You could hate me." "I did," I admitted. "In another life." "I did. But it wasn't really about you. It was about them. About feeling invisible. You were just the mirror that showed me what I wasn't getting." "Another life," she repeated. "Sometimes you say things like that, and I wonder if you mean them literally." I smiled but didn't answer. Some truths were too strange to speak aloud. "I'm going to do better," Sophie said. "At the academy, when I start building my career, I'm not going to let it consume me the way it consumed Mum and Dad's attention to me. I'm going to remember that there's more to life than applause." "You love performing," I said. "Don't let my experience make you doubt that." "I do love it," she agreed. "But I loved it more when I stopped thinking I needed to perform to be loved. You taught me that, by stopping the performance of being okay with being invisible." I hadn't thought about it that way, but she was right. By refusing to continue playing the role of the forgotten daughter, I'd freed both of us from the patterns that had shaped our childhood. "We're going to be okay," Sophie said, "both of us, separately and together." "Yeah," I said, feeling the truth of it settle into my bones. "We are." The Geneva summit exceeded every expectation. I presented my research to audiences of scientists and students who engaged with my work on its merits. I formed connections with the researchers from 3 continents. I refined my understanding of my field and my place in it. And when I stood on the stage for the closing ceremony, receiving the summit's Emerging Researcher Award, I looked out at the audience and saw my parents in the 3rd row. They were both crying, both beaming, both present in a way they'd learned too late in one timeline and just in time in another. But the moment wasn't about them. It wasn't even really about the award, though I'd earned it through years of focused work. It was about the girl in the empty gymnasium, holding a blue ribbon no one had seen. It was about dying invisible and being reborn determined. It was about learning that the only validation that mattered was the kind I gave myself. I accepted the award with grace, smiled for the photographs, and felt complete in a way that had nothing to do with external recognition and everything to do with internal peace. The flight home was quiet. My father dozed in his seat across the aisle. My mother read a book, occasionally glancing up to smile at me. I stared out the window at the clouds below and thought about the shape of second chances. In my first life, I'd measured my worth by their attention and found myself wanting. In this life, I'd measured my worth by my own standards and found myself capable of extraordinary things. The difference wasn't in what they gave me, but in what I'd learned to give myself. When we landed, my phone buzzed with messages. Dr. Williams congratulating me on the summit results, fellow students from the program checking in, and one email that made me catch my breath, an early acceptance offer from MIT with a full scholarship and an invitation to join a research team normally reserved for graduate students. I showed my parents in the car on the way home. My mother cried again. My father kept saying MIT like he couldn't quite believe it was real. I felt the pride radiating from them and found I could accept it without needing it, could welcome their joy without being diminished by its previous absence. Sophie was waiting on the front porch when we pulled into the driveway. She'd made a banner that read, "Welcome Home Scientist," in glittery letters that would have looked more at home celebrating one of her performances. The sight made me laugh, genuinely and openly. "Too much?" she asked as I approached. "It's perfect," I said, meaning it. That evening we had dinner together, all four of us. No performances to rush to, no competitions to prepare for, just family existing in the same space without crisis or achievement required. We talked about everything and nothing. Sophie told stories from her academy audition. I described the Swiss Alps visible from my hotel window. My parents listened and participated, present in ways they were still learning. It wasn't perfect. Years of patterns didn't dissolve in months of changed behaviour. There were still moments when my mother's attention drifted to Sophie's activities first, still times when my father forgot to ask about my work. But the difference was that now they caught themselves. They noticed. They corrected course. And I no longer crumbled when they failed. I'd built something in myself that didn't require their reinforcement to stand strong. Later, alone in my room, I looked at the blue ribbon I'd kept from nationals. Not my first place trophy, but the simple ribbon for category winner that had started everything. I thought about its predecessor from another timeline, sitting on a desk in a life I'd lived and lost. In that first life, this ribbon had represented the peak of what I could achieve while starving for acknowledgement. In this life, it was merely a milestone on a path I'd chosen for myself. The difference was everything. I pinned it to my bulletin board, not in the centre, but off to the side, one achievement among many. My eyes moved to the acceptance letter from MIT, the photos from Geneva, the scholarship certificates, the newspaper clippings. Evidence of a life built deliberately, consciously for myself. I'd been given an impossible gift, a chance to live twice, to correct the mistakes and claim the opportunities I'd missed. But the real gift hadn't been the rebirth itself. It had been the clarity to understand that I'd never needed their validation to be extraordinary. I'd only needed to stop waiting for permission to become who I already was. The moon rose outside my window, casting silver light across my room. In another timeline, I died alone and forgotten. One last invisibility in a life full of them. In this timeline, I'd die someday too. Everyone did. But I would die as myself, fully seen because I'd learnt to see myself first. That knowledge settled into me like peace, like power, like the quiet satisfaction of a story completed on my own terms. I turned off the light and lay in the darkness. The blue ribbon visible in the moonlight streaming through my window, and my last thought before sleep claimed me was simple and clear. I am enough. I had always been enough. They just hadn't known how to see it, and I'd finally stopped needing them to.